after October 7th, we've lost a lot of funding and a lot of access to working on our systems. There was a big contract that was supposed to curb tons of textile waste leaving the global north that we have lost. That fast fashion brand said to me, if you say one more word about Palestine, we are going to withdraw this agreement from you.
Welcome to The Tea, where we break down the stories behind the headlines and ask the questions that matter. I'm your host, Myriam François. Before we get into the episode, I just want to take a tiny moment to ask you to do one thing for me. Hit that subscribe button now. We're a small independent team, no big network, no corporate backing, just a handful of people who care deeply about having honest conversations and shining a light on what often goes unseen or unheard. If our work resonates with you too, click subscribe now and join us on Patreon, link in our bio. Today, we're not just talking about collective liberation, we're challenging what it means in a world where activism is under siege. Is collective liberation a genuine moral imperative, or has it become an empty slogan diluted by digital echo chambers and rising authoritarianism? As global power structures harden and dissent is policed, the urgency and complexity of this question has never been greater. Are the struggles of women in Iran for freedom truly connected to Inuit communities battling climate catastrophe, or to trans men in America fighting for recognition, or Islamist dissidents in Egypt demanding change? Does the language of identity politics unite us, or does it risk splintering our movements further? In a time where even the idea of the collective is up for debate, can we still imagine a liberation that's genuinely shared? Our guest today is Céline Semaan, a Lebanese-Canadian designer, writer, and founder of The Slow Factory, a digital platform you've likely come across for its bold takes on justice, climate, and creative resistance. Through Slow Factory and her newly released memoir, A Woman is a School, Céline is building new spaces for learning and organizing that push us beyond hashtags and headlines. Céline, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Myriam.
So, Céline, let's start out by giving a little bit about your backstory. You were born and raised for the first few years in Lebanon. Your family fled as refugees. Tell us a little bit about how that backstory has shaped the work that you do today.
Thank you so much for having me. Yes, of course. I mean, it's all based on lived experience. Being a war survivor, a child refugee, having escaped with my family, with my mom and my sister, to attempt a family reunification in Canada, in Montreal, via the United States. A long journey, but of course, a very privileged one when we look at the journey that many migrants, refugees are experiencing today at the borders of the United States, which is occupied Turtle Island. My journey was very privileged, if you will. We did manage a family reunification. We were granted asylum in Montreal, where we lived for 9 years. And in 1995, a ceasefire happened in Beirut, Lebanon, and that same year, my parents returned home. And ever since, they've been there, and I've been between Lebanon and the rest of the world.
And so, for people who might not be as familiar with the story of Lebanon, what was it that made you refugees?
In the words of my mother, there was no Slow Factory in 1982, and what occurred in Lebanon, the siege under Israel in 1982, in fact, when I was born, all the way to our forced evacuation, the neighborhood that we were in being bombarded regularly and constantly. And you could kind of imagine what it looks like when you are witnessing what's happening today in Gaza, in the West Bank, also in the south of Lebanon, in Beirut, in Dahieh. You kind of we are witnessing it again. And so where we are, we were made refugees, if you will, because of the occupation of Palestine, because of the war that was happening and raging in Lebanon, ongoing bombardments, a siege where no food, no water was allowed in 1982. Hundreds of thousands of people were martyred and killed, and continue to be. And Palestinians, Lebanese, Christians and Muslims and Druze and all divisions occurred in Lebanon. So Lebanon is an interesting case study of what we are looking at today in the world, and has influenced me. Being Lebanese, having escaped the war, has influenced me in my career to try to shed the light on injustices that are often left in, that are often misunderstood, if you will. So how can we explain things that are deeply complex in a way that the global north could, folks could understand, and not only just understand, but also be driven into taking action towards change.
And in your book, you describe yourself as a hekawati, so a storyteller. How does reclaiming this tradition empower you? Why is it important for us to hear these stories?
So these stories have been discredited, right? They have been erased and they have been bombarded. In fact, one of the first locations that the Israeli occupation tries to erase and bombard are archives, libraries, schools, bookstores. Anywhere where we have archives of our humanity, of our culture, these locations are subject to being erased and bombarded. Our stories are data with a soul. That's how I say it in the book. They're data points. And they are important data points because oral tradition is deeply, deeply ingrained in our indigenous wisdom, in the ways in which we live on that land and how we tell stories and how we sort of pass down our history from families to families. Because what has happened to a certain family in Lebanon is held by the stories that women tell each other. There could be personal histories that touch on the political, and that's what the book is about. It's really from the personal to the political, and how we're safeguarding these stories and stewarding the knowledge of our ancestors towards the next generation, and how do we understand where we come from when we have been surviving war. And trauma creates amnesia, truly. We start forgetting who we are. We start forgetting where we come from, even though we are still on that land. And for some of us, we are in Lebanon on sovereign land. Even though we continue to battle occupation, this is our land. And so the land holds stories. And these stories are not just personal and family stories. They're stories about the climate, our relationship to the land, our relationship to harvest, our relationship to family and family tradition, our relationship to history and colonialism, language, and all of these things that I narrate in my book.
So storytelling as resistance in the face of erasure is what I'm hearing. And I suppose it's so pertinent at a time where we can see attempts to sort of culturally erase so many of the indigenous communities of the Levantine region. You, in your memoir, So A Woman is a School, you weave, as you say, these personal stories with, political critique and a celebration and a reclaiming of indigenous and ancestral knowledge from the global South. There's a lot of, trendiness around talking about indigenous knowledge and indigenous wisdom. How do you navigate the line between honoring indigenous cultures and fetishizing them, as I sometimes feel happens online?
Absolutely. And, I say the word indigenous with a lot of respect, knowing that we have been deeply detribalized, especially in the Levant, especially where we come from. We have been surviving colonialism for thousands of years, unlike our peers in the global north or in newly discovered, quote unquote, lands where the battle is in the hundreds of years. We have been truly surviving and stewarding our culture despite all of the erasure, the attempts to discredit us for thousands of years. Now, with that comes a silver lining of, one, we are really good at resistance, but two, we also battle with remembering who we are, remembering our traditions, because they have been deeply discredited. Our indigenous wisdom has been looked down upon as taboo for many, many years. And in fact, with the recent occupation and colonization of Lebanon. And again, this is debated, right? Because a lot of Lebanese people would say, but France civilized us, which is a very controversial topic. Have they civilized us? You know, of course not. But for many, this is the illusion that they battle with. And because of that, they battle with their own relationship, with their own culture and knowledge. And there is a lot of pain that surrounds our connection to the past, our connection to our indigenous knowledge and the traditions that we held, even though they were at the fringes of spirituality, at the fringes of the mystique for so many years. I've tried to reconcile this knowledge with as scientific knowledge as many indigenous scholars do. You know, we're not a unique situation in Lebanon. It's, in fact, there are connecting stories. There are stories that connect between different nations when it comes to remembering and stewarding and archiving these stories as legitimate stories. And just to recognize these stories is a big step forward, not as folklore, not as a Halloween costume, but truly as knowledge with a capital K that needs to be looked at the same level as colonial knowledge, if not a bit more, with more reverence, with more sacredness.
And that's so interesting because I suppose in your book you also talk about this idea of the mountain of trauma. You've already referred to trauma. But so there's the trauma, obviously, of colonization in its physical form, right? The appropriation of land, the enslavement or, denigration of people's humanity. But then there's what you're also talking about, right? Which is the idea that even your sense of self and your culture and the wisdom within it isn't regarded as valuable or universal in the way that you mentioned the French, the colonizers have a sense of their values and ideals as somehow being universal. How do you, not necessarily personally, but how do communities who've been through such trauma heal without the amnesia that you talk about? How do you hold space for so much pain? And I'm thinking obviously of you in Lebanon, I'm thinking of people in Palestine, Congo, Sudan. There are so many communities experiencing such profound trauma. How do you hold on to your sense of self without the trauma becoming self-defining, or should it become part of it?
Oh, that's such a great question and a very complex one. And I must just ground it in the book, The Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire, because the trauma we hold is nothing compared to the trauma that the oppressor is holding. Because we tend to look at us, the people who are under siege, oppressed, as the victims. But the victims are the oppressors, truly. They are the ones that are trapped in their illusions. We are, in fact, the ones that are sovereign and free. And when we remember that, there is some kind of empowerment that comes with that. And in the healing process, I think healing and the healing journey of our nations are going to be central in the next decade and are going to demand of us truly to reckon with what healing means outside of dogma, outside of organized religion, in a way that can unify us, in a way that can also free us, continue this journey towards liberation. And this journey towards liberation is truly a spiritual journey, and a journey that reconciles the spiritual with the material, which is deeply, deeply indigenous wisdom.
Ooh, shivers. I want to talk about the spiritual dimension because I feel like a lot of the discussion over collective liberation often denigrates the space of spirituality within that. But first, what does collective liberation mean to you?
Collective liberation to me is this idea of oneness, not necessarily as we are all the same, because we aren't. We are a biodiversity of thought, of ethnicity, of originality, but this idea of oneness, that even through our divisions and separations, we are connected through this planet, this earth, the breath that we take in, the water that we drink, the soil that we cultivate. This is the planet that we're living on. It's an ecological awakening for me. And of course, it's a spiritual one. But as you said, spirituality is often removed from the equation because of the co-optation of spiritual wisdom and spirituality. It has been capitalized on. It has been completely desacralized. And when I say that, it's when we are bypassing through spiritual endeavors the realities that we are facing. The industrial spiritual complex, if you will, has been unable to reckon with reality, has been unable to address what's happening in Gaza today. People are breathworking their way through everything, and in fact they are the ones that are suffering the most. People are continually people that are engaging in spirituality without being grounded in reality are suffering.
You set up the Slow Factory. You have almost 1 million followers on Instagram. The slogan on Instagram is, "We are architects of our liberation." Can digital spaces foster liberatory, revolutionary action?
The big question behind that question is are we siloing everything and looking just at digital, or are we understanding that digital is a small facet of a larger body of work? And yes, we are on digital spaces, so might as well have a footprint there. If we were to look at it from a pure a sort of a purity mindset, which is also deeply colonial, then we would never be anywhere and we would actually do nothing at all, right? So we have to be able to understand that liberatory work is messy. It gets your fingers dirty when you're actually doing it, just like planting. You get stuff underneath your nails and you're not pure as you're working towards it. So we are on Meta, and we do invest a lot of time on this app. We are as well building outside of Meta, and we're inviting people to migrate. It's imperfect. There's no perfection in all of that work. We exist under a colonial and capitalistic system. We have provided work for free for decades, to our detriment. And that has set the precedent also to look at this work as free. You know, when we're talking about freedom, we're not talking about gratis, free. Everything is for free. We need to understand that it has value. And what value are you willing to put on it is the question.
And it's a really big one for those of us organizing in digital spaces because of the fact that we are the products on those platforms, right? It's our data that makes us the products. And so they are technically free, but in fact, we're paying a very high price for them that we're maybe just not aware of. You know, can you sell, not necessarily you, can one sell, you know, liberatory analysis, liberatory knowledge in a space that is almost completely dedicated to selling us commercialized products? You know, can we sell, you know, collective liberation alongside, you know, the latest lip kit?
Lips for collective liberation, right?
Lips for collective liberation.
The question is, are we selling or are we providing a service, right? And who gets to pay for this labor? Who pays for labor? For the labor that goes behind this work that we're doing. For the longest time, we believed that the labor should be paid by corporations and foundations, that they have the money to sustain what we're doing. And we went after those things. And we managed to negotiate amazing relationships that were no strings attached, that allowed us to do our work without asking the public for support. We're providing the support directly for free to our public. But there was an illusion there because we were on platforms that were already capitalizing from our public with our content that was free, quote unquote, and liberatory, quote unquote. But it wasn't really, because under this platform, Meta, there is very little things that are free, right? We are paying with our data, and now we are understanding that we're paying with our democracy, and we're paying with our rights, and we're paying with far more value that money can buy. Money cannot buy what we are actually giving Meta today, even when we are providing content quote unquote for free. When we're launching our articles for free on this app, it's not free. We're actually contributing to the detriment of our freedom of expression, because ultimately we're becoming vulnerable to censorship. And not only that, we're also feeding the AI systems that are learning from us, that are using this information against us. So what is free? Is it really free? Is our labor paid for? Are we doing this as a service? These are the questions we're asking ourselves behind the scenes at Slow Factory when we're having to make really difficult decisions as to where do we archive our content, how do we create sovereign digital systems that are outside of these Silicon Valley-backed platform like Meta, X, and Substack, and Blue Sky, and whatever else. People think that, oh, this new startup is good. How do you know it's good? It's backed by the same system. How do you build truly sovereign technology? You know, how do you create infrastructure that is built by the public, by the people, for the people? And this infrastructure is the foundation on which we are willing to build upon these liberatory systems. It's a trick.
Absolutely. And I want to add to that, you know, the idea that like these alternative platforms are competing with, you know, if we're going to, let's say on the subject of apps, compete with, you know, huge private equity funds investing in competitor apps in ways that, you know, something that might be liberatory may not wish to engage with a fund that's rooted in, you know, arms sales or, you know, destruction of the environment. And so this idea of messiness in collective liberation, I think, is such a powerful and important idea to bear in mind, because there is this moral purity in the movement, right? There's a lot of policing of each other's behaviors, you know. I think in the UK, there was a big controversy recently around, you know, a British rapper called Stormzy, who you might be familiar with, who had, you know, been very vocal on social issues, including on Palestine, and then took a big deal with McDonald's. And a lot of people were very, very disappointed with him on that. How should people respond when figures they look up to maybe do make deals that they feel don't align with the ideals they proclaim?
I mean, it's a very tough question. And again, internalized colonialism is everywhere. And the instinct to go into policing and scrutiny becomes second nature in a policed state, right? We can say F the police, abolish the police, and then you become the police. What happens when you become the police, right? That's the bigger question for me. And looking at it from a place where, yes, we can criticize, but we must bring in solutions. Yes, we can say this was not right, but then throwing stones at people is also primitive. Like then what? And then what do you propose we do? I'm not saying Stormzy did the right thing. I don't even know. I don't even have time to inquire about every single thing. But what I can say is that ultimately purity is a tool in the toolbox of colonialism. It is a tool that will not dismantle the master's house, as Audre Lorde said. It's a tool that is not going to support our communities. In fact, policing each other has broken down our communities, has broken down our movements pretty effectively. Oftentimes, you know, the dominant culture will invest in infrastructure like surveillance and, you know, funding discord amongst our communities. Right now, I think they're looking at us and laughing, really, because there is no need to put in money towards that. We're doing the job for them. We are dismantling our own systems for them. We are literally poking holes horizontally instead of punching up. And we are confused as a community. We are hurt. We are angry. There's a lot of anger and misplaced anger towards one another. We've experienced it. And we've experienced it with grace, I would have to say, because we do not wish to engage or mimic or mirror these types of treatments towards others, even though I too have been upset. I too have been angry. I too have been feeling like it is unfair to witness our peers engaging in capitalism and co-opting our words in ways that hurt our movement. But we must keep our focus. We must keep our focus and our discipline towards where we are actually going, and to remind ourselves that there is a bigger goal out of this, that there is a lot of question about funding that can come left and right. For instance, Slow Factory has declined millions of dollars of funding from fast fashion brands on the regular because we cannot be bought. But we have in the past worked with certain fashion brands because we've managed to negotiate agreements where we were able to address and curb their harm on the environment. We were able to work behind the scenes directly on the harm that they were making. Because when you can curb the harm of a fast fashion group or a large conglomerate, you're making 100 times more impact than if you are just focusing on smaller initiatives. Sometimes smaller initiatives are amazing. Don't get me wrong. I don't go chasing around big things. But when big things happen, it's also a big step forward. We can't be afraid of the big, and in this sort of battle, it feels like David versus Goliath. And we often feel like we're the David in the situation when we're in fact the Goliath. And this is something that a dear friend of mine, Baljeet, has taught me, that we, the global majority, have more power than we give ourselves credit for.
Let me ask you about this. After October the 7th, the Slow Factory lost their funding for speaking up on Palestine. You used to be funded through grants and, as you say, brand partnerships, and you've worked with major names, H&M, Adidas, even the UN. Why did these brands stop working with you? What exactly was the red line that you were told you'd crossed?
We've lost Adidas in 2021 after we had spoken about, we made a post that went extremely viral that sort of set the tone of how we talk about Palestine. It said, it's not complicated, it's colonialism. And we explained the myth and the facts regarding the situation in Gaza. This was after a bomb, like another attack from Israel in Gaza that was shortly after the summer of 2020. And after that moment, it went so viral that Tucker Carlson got caught of it, and all the right-wing media pundits got caught. They were already watching us closely because in 2020 we made, we shook the table, if you will. But our work precedes that time, right? Like we started in 2012 with Palestine as the heart of our causes. Like I said earlier, Lebanon and Palestine are the case studies of what we're trying to explain when it comes to collective liberation and climate and human rights as a center, like as an intertwined and interconnected struggle.
Explain to us how they are interconnected, because I don't think it'll necessarily be obvious to all people how all of those are connected.
Absolutely. So I get this question a lot, like, how is climate connected to human rights? Well, first and foremost, let's just simplify it to the fact that you live on a planet, you are dependent of it, you're in fact addicted to it. You need air, you can't live more than 10 seconds without it. You need water. You cannot survive more than a few weeks without it. And again, when we're saying these things, we want to remember what's happening in Gaza. There is a siege. There is a siege against the Palestinians at the moment that are surviving genocide. They're surviving famine. There's no water coming into Gaza. There's no food coming into Gaza. This is an environmental catastrophe in the making. The bombs that are being thrown on Gaza are affecting people. This is a human rights situation. This is a climate situation. And it is all done because underneath Gaza, there is gas and there is oil and there is access to these resources, finite resources that pollute our planet. All of the things, all of the wars that we have survived up until today in our short history of humankind have all been connected to climate survival. survival on this planet and our addiction to finite resources, and particularly fossil fuel.
On that, I wanted to ask you about, it sort of makes me think, obviously, the word intersectionality, which obviously is, very current in collective liberation circles. But I do think there's also been a bit of a pushback, you've probably noticed, around intersectionality, and particularly more recently around identity politics. And they are obviously two different things. But on those issues, I suppose, the critique of intersectionality would say something along the lines of, it's completely overwhelming to me to have, free Sudan, free Congo, free Palestine, free Lebanon, free Yemen. I don't even know what it means anymore. At that point, it just becomes empty. It just becomes empty words, because I don't even know where those connect, and I don't know how I liberate one, liberating the other. Do you hear that sometimes as well?
Of course, there are criticism about all these things, and the fear of them becoming obsolete, becoming words that we're just saying. When the peace sign was designed, it was so revolutionary. It was such a symbol, and it was also a symbol countering colonialism and capitalism and calling for the freedom of Vietnam. And now it has just become a fashion item. People wear it. They don't even know where it comes from, what it means. It even is cheesy, right? Like, you don't want to wear a peace sign anymore. Or people who tattooed it, it's like, oh God, Lord. But it does come from a sort of a foundational understanding that this symbol meant the freedom of Vietnam, that was connected with the freedom of Black and Asian struggles in occupied, Turtle Island, and what so-called is the United States. And so this conversation must be ongoing. It cannot become a slogan, right? So yes, we have made crew necks that say free Palestine, free Tibet, free Congo, free Sudan, free, Syria, free everybody. Because ultimately I made those things for me. So when I go on public spaces, I can, represent what I'm talking about. And of course, we started selling them to support our work after we've been defunded, because the idea was that we needed to figure out ways to support what we were doing. I just want to answer, why did these brands defund us?
Yes.
So we were working with several brands, and it was not working where they fund us and we go do what we want, and then we wear their clothing and we say, go buy these things. We never engaged in this type of marketing. We never engaged in this type of influencing people to purchase anything. In fact, I'm proud of us for what we've negotiated with these brands in the past that were not dependent on us talking about them on social media at all. We didn't owe them anything. They, in fact, funded our work, and we were also working behind the scenes with them in curbing their waste and curbing their harm on the planet, from the perspective of what we could do on a systemic level. Because ultimately, Slow Factory is not a media account. We always were engineers and systems designers that worked behind the scenes. After October 7th, we've lost a lot of funding and a lot of access to working on our systems and the systems that we hold dear to our hearts. There was a big contract that was supposed to curb tons of textile waste leaving the global north that we have lost. So now we don't have control over it. We don't have any access to it, because that fast fashion brand said to me, if you say one more word about Palestine, we are going to withdraw this agreement from you.
Straight up?
Straight
up. If you say one more word on Palestine,
we will null the contract.
I mean, this is mafia shit. I'm sorry. This is insane. So,
and then we were like, Palestine.
Palestine.
Free Palestine, bitch.
That's insane. Okay, that's actually wild beyond measure, but it's good to know that the red line is literally just the word Palestine. At least we know where we stand, huh?
Exactly, but then also look at the harm that this has created, right? Like, it's not just a harm of silencing us, it's a harm of the work that we were doing on a systemic level in curbing waste that was shipped from the global north in tons to clutter the global south, particularly in Africa and West Africa. That's something that we've lost control over, that we've negotiated for years, okay? This is the biggest harm that they've created, is them getting by with their harm, getting by with the damage that they're doing, keeping the status quo. That's ultimately what discrediting groups like ours does. It just protects the harm, ultimately. Now, looking back at what has happened, I don't know if you all know, but we had a lab where we were growing leather from plants. And for years, we worked on this leather, and we've sustained it through grants and working closely with universities in protecting the IP around it and growing a material science that had the opportunity to preserve life on Earth, right? Like, we do not want to be dependent on animals. We do not want to be dependent on slaughterhouses that exist solely for leather. This is not a byproduct of the meat industry. This is a co-product. If you want to learn more, again, there's tons of information on our website about that. But this is, again, the other type of harm that it has created, where we were forced to shut down the lab because of lack of funding. We were never just a media platform, but now we're embracing it. And watch out, we will be a big media platform.
Well, you're already huge, almost 1 million followers already. You touched on something I wanted to ask you about, which was typically when we've looked at collective liberation movements, and, you know, I look at one that has inspired me a lot in how they operated, the Black Panthers in America, there was a combination of pairing political education with real world action, you know, breakfast clubs for children, supporting families, exposing injustices, particularly obviously police brutality. How do you ensure that the online education that you deliver turns into something concrete in the real world? And you know, how do you ensure that it doesn't become, you know, I think sometimes of some of the work I see online as a form of self-absolution. It's like, I like the post that says free everyone. I shared it on my story. I can sleep easy tonight.
We do a lot of work offline, actually. And again, this is why I've always shied away from looking at the Slow Factory as a media platform. We never looked at ourselves as a media platform. We never applied for media grants up until now. We never really embraced digital like that. We always looked at digital as a fun to have, you know, the cherry on top of what we were doing. Yes, we were effective because we're effective designers, but this was never the priority. What I think is really, really important is our ongoing offline work. We have, you know, the Freedom Dinner series, where we provide dinner for free at no cost for hundreds of people monthly. We have screenings all over the world that we provide for free. We have workshops that we provide, that we give at various locations. We are also hosting regularly conferences, festivals, gatherings. We convene a lot offline.
So the real world is still essential, you would say, for people who are interested in maybe fostering more, you know, collective liberation circles, you know.
Yes,
are you
absolutely.
saying it cannot stay simply in the digital space?
That being said, the digital space provides access, okay? And it is also an important thing for our disabled communities, our communities that cannot go and be in physical locations, our undocumented communities, communities that don't feel safe being in larger groups. We have multiple ways of convening. Sometimes we convene thousands of people at a time, and sometimes we convene 20 people at a time. We travel a lot. We are very decentralized. We've always been on the streets, and we've always been offline. Now we're less and less on the street, to be honest with you, because we need to preserve our safety. And, you know, to be frank with you, I personally have received countless of death threats, and I feel less and less safe in bigger, you know, uncontrolled physical locations. So I create locations where our safety is at the heart of it.
Who is making death threats against you, Céline?
Lots of anonymous Zionist bodies that are sending things to my house. Yeah.
I raise this because, you know, we hear a lot about the fear and harm of certain communities, but very rarely do we hear about the mafia-style tactics that are used by pro-Zionist groups. You're not the first person with a public account to talk to me about actual death threats being made against them for their work. And I think it's important for us to speak openly about the sorts of threats that people live with and the sorts of harm. You know, I have a friend of mine who has been attacked twice at protests, once run over, another time punched in the face. I mean, these are forms of violence that people who are simply out protesting genocide are experiencing. So thank you for sharing that with us. Here at The Tea, we're all about cutting through the noise and giving you real, balanced conversations. And that's why we love using Ground News. Ground News shows you how different news outlets cover the same story, and their blind spot feed reveals stories that one side of the political spectrum just isn't talking about. For instance, this week, Israel's Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, Sharon Haskell, declared that the government will not accept international investigations of the war in Gaza due to concerns about state legitimacy. Ground News helps you understand how stories are framed, who's ignoring what, and why that matters. It's become an essential part of how we research for The Tea. It's shocking sometimes to see what we're not seeing. We use Ground News to make sure we're bringing you the full picture. As a loyal tea drinker, you can now subscribe to Ground News and get unlimited access at 40% of their Vantage plan to see the world beyond your feed and stay informed without the spin. Check it out at ground.news/the tea. We thank Ground.News for sharing our dedication to showing the whole story and for supporting our community and our independence. I want to ask you about the climate situation, because for a long time we had 1.5 degrees as, you know, the totemic level that we had to, you know, make sure we never went above 1.5. Scientists were warning that it would lead to these deadly heat waves and floods and ecosystem collapses. And we've now seen 21 of the last 22 months above that threshold, with 2024 the hottest year ever recorded. Here in the UK, this is the hottest June that we've ever recorded. Do you think that our movements need to shift from trying to, quote unquote, prevent catastrophe to preparing for life after irreversible change?
We've definitely crossed the threshold from mitigation into preparedness. Are we prepared? Not really. Yes, the answer is yes. We need to start looking at how are we going to prepare ourselves to survive this collapse, essentially. I'm not talking necessarily about the earth collapsing on us and the sky falling on your head, but I'm talking about a series of collapse, right? Like, we can look at it from the lens of what we are all collectively witnessing, right? Like, collapse comes with a rise in our awareness. There's a rise in the awareness of the things that are connected with one another. For instance, the police brutality in the United States and the apartheid state of Israel, and what's going on in the Congo and our dependency towards resources and finite and whatnot, what's going on in Sudan, what's going on in Haiti, what's going on in Eritrea and Ethiopia, what's going on in Tibet, what's going on in Kashmir, what's going on in Syria. Like, it's all interwoven together. And I think that the rise of awareness that people are starting to feel has contributed in the collapse of the illusion that government is here to protect you, and government and corporations are not working side by side, but they are. In fact, the recent report by Francesca Albanese has demonstrated what we've all known, if we were in the space from the beginning, that yes, there is a connection between corporate greed and, apartheid states. That being said, the collapse that we are witnessing on an environmental level is something that we still have to reckon with, because, again, you asked me what's the connection between climate and human rights. There's still a lot of education that needs to happen on that front, but also there needs to be a sort of a guiding principle of how do we survive collectively via our communities, and not relying on governments to provide us with any kind of support. As you're seeing, government in the United States is defunding FEMA. They're defunding a lot of climate structures. They are putting on their FBI most watched list organizations that are in support of the most vulnerable populations on the planet, like Habitat for Humanity. Can you believe that this is becoming a threat?
Is now a terrorist group? Good to know. Good to know who's who.
So under fascism and under authoritarianism, which are two different things, but they are kind of intertwined, we need to learn how to organize. We need to learn how to create our own infrastructure. It goes back to what I was saying in the beginning about the infrastructure that we need to be able to build. And yes, they will be messy. They're not going to be funded by the Lord himself. They're going to be funded by each other. And that's literally the work that we are calling for. Is how are we going to use our creativity, our imagination, our resources to work together to learn solidarity, to relearn solidarity, because ultimately solidarity is at the opposite end of capitalism, because solidarity means we're looking at the collective. Where under capitalism, we're used to looking at ourselves as individuals. So maybe someone will have a survival pack or will have like their bunker ready for the collapse. But then if you are the only one who's surviving, ultimately you're not going to survive for long.
Well, no, because we'll all be coming for you. Apart from anything else, just FYI, I'm a really good swimmer.
Good to know.
It's interesting because I was thinking about the fact that for a long time, I feel we've abdicated as citizens of our respective countries almost the responsibility for political change, political solutions, whether to our elected leaders or when we talk about climate change, let's say to the UN. And, you mentioned, obviously, the US, I think there's a massive database on climate change that's been removed from the US government website, which means that tracking even those changes becomes harder. It sort of almost feels like we're being pushed to stop relying on these supranational structures, even governmental structures, and to sort of look at one another, because clearly it doesn't look like the change is going to be coming from above at this stage. What happens when seemingly collective forms of liberation actually feel like they're in conflict? And we can take a really good example, which is the Syria issue in the region. Now, for those who won't be familiar with it, Syria was ruled by the Assad regime, really brutal dictatorship, some of the most horrific stories of imprisonment of, thousands of people.
Disappearances.
It's hard to actually put into words the brutality, I think, of the Assad regime. Assad falls through a purported collective liberation movement led by a former extremist known as Jelani at the time, who was certainly a member of ISIS and then Al-Qaeda, so really friendly groups, and has now sort of been reimagined as a reformed man leading Syria. And look, I'm partly being sarcastic. It's maybe not even my place to. There's a lot of Syrians who are really, really thrilled to see their country freed of Assad. And I don't think anyone is sad to see Assad go. But that had implications, didn't it, geopolitically? And we have to be honest about that, which is that there was something in the region called the axis of resistance, of which Syria was considered to be a constitutive part of that axis of resistance to colonialism, to Israel. As you and I both know, Syria became a very hot potato in activist circles. How do we think of collective liberation in the context of an issue like Syria?
That's such a good question. I don't think I have a straightforward answer, because we are still uncovering the sort of secrecy that the Assad regime has held for so long, really closed up in a trauma box, really. And so we are sort of, this is like developing news, right? Like this is developing history that we don't have yet all the answers that are required. All we know is what we are able to uncover in real time, right? And I think that this conversation must be led by Syrians, diaspora and Syrians on the ground, who are reckoning with their history in real time. They're reckoning with the loss, tremendous loss in real time. Thousands of families have lost their family members, fathers, sons, uncles, and I have lost a friend through this. Basil Kartabil, was a friend of mine in the beginning of the Arab Spring. We were all working in Creative Commons. He was holding a hackerspace in Damascus, and he was kidnapped and then disappeared. And then later on, we found out he was murdered. And we had done so much work in raising awareness at the time, in 2010, 2011, about his disappearance. I mean, there are thousands of cases like that we are uncovering today. And I think that the work of collective liberation, as you mentioned in the beginning, is a work of healing, is a work of patience, is a work of remembrance. And I feel like right now the situation in Syria is being developed as we speak. Like we are uncovering it. And not only that, we are also learning that there are deep ties between the new regime put in place and the Israeli occupation, and the normalization of Israel in the Middle East is an ongoing effort from the United States and Israel to impose on the region. And will they succeed with this new regime? That's the big question. You know, up until recently, we have just started to learn that this new regime is wanting to occupy the north of Lebanon and the Bekaa Valley. And these are constant threats to the Lebanese people. I mean, it is a lot to bear witness often. And it's hard to say, is free Syria equal collective liberation? I think that it is not a finite state, right? We have not arrived. We have not arrived yet to collective liberation. I think that when we do, we will feel it. And this does not feel like liberation to me.
And I obviously will just put the disclaimer that, you know, I think there are obviously competing visions of what the free Syria looks like to Syrians.
Absolutely. And I feel like I am not in a place to speak. I just personally don't feel free.
Yeah, no. And I think it's important for us to be able to talk about that. I mean, of course, that's part of the wider discussion in collective liberation movements, which is the emphasis on, you know, I mean, there's a movement obviously criticizing what we call identity politics, right? The idea that the only people who can speak on an issue are those who have the lived experience of that issue. And I suppose on something like Syria, a lot of criticism that has come from external parties has been mitigated by this appeal to, well, if you're not Syrian, you can't speak on it. What do you say to that?
I respect that. But also as someone who, as a nation, someone who comes from a nation that has lived under also Syrian occupation, I think that everyone has the right to speak about something that has affected them. But with due respect to Syrian people, I think the mic is in their hands.
Talking about spaces of liberation, clearly we have concluded so far in our discussion that it's not the governments or the international organizations that are likely to come and save us at this point. Could it be the Met Gala? You may have seen that the world's wealthiest and established fashion platforms looked like the resistance as the government declared war on diversity, equality, and inclusion initiatives. This year's theme was Black Dandyism and was entirely devoted to designers of color. There was also the Spring-Summer 2026 show at Paris Fashion Week by Willy Chavriers, who opened with 35 models in white t-shirts and shorts kneeling in silence, a direct reference, of course, to the treatment of migrants by ICE in America right now. Can fashion be a space of resistance, or is this what some might call control opposition?
What a great question. You know, it's a bit of both, I have to say. There's an important part of occupying fashion as we occupy Wall Street, or attempted to. There's an important part of being part of the fashion industry as a troublemaker. I think that there are many in the fashion industry who are amazing troublemakers that are important catalysts of change culturally. I had the opportunity to be that for a short while up until October 7, when I was ousted from the fashion industry, but not for long. Watch and see.
No doubt.
They can't. They're obsessed. They're obsessed with Slow Factory.
No. Well, as we often know, they need you more than you need them, is the actual truth.
I think so. I think their relevancy is on a very shaky table. I think the relevancy of the fashion industry is in the hands of the public at the end of the day. And that's something that, the fashion industry works really, really, really hard to make the public forget. But we hold the relevancy, and we hold also the spending power, if you will, on what is important in fashion and what isn't. Now, yes, we are, it's a dance of influence, right? Like we are, we're battling for our sovereignty constantly with all these systems. That being said, fashion could be a big catalyst of change. Now, would fashion want to be a big catalyst of change is the question, because the fashion industry does have the power to be a tremendous catalyst of change. And it is, in a way, it's just on the wrong side of change. Fashion and colonialism and imperialism are sleeping in the same bed, right? And they have the same interests financially. And so ultimately, when fashion is activating its power to change, it often is leaning towards fascism. And we are seeing it today. We're seeing it in the silencing of so many people, of the discrediting of powerful figures. I mean, why is Francesca Albanese not on the cover of Vogue?
For real.
Like, please, can somebody answer this? This gorgeous, powerful icon of a person. Why is she not the icon? Because we know she's the icon.
Well, we know she's the icon, but it also shows them up as being so profoundly disconnected. When I am seeing... no
Lauren
shade.
Sanchez.
I'm not going to name any names, but when I see certain people on the front of Vogue now, I'm just like, yawn. Like, do we even care?
Not. Who's buying Vogue?
The world is on fire. Like,
no one's buying any of this, and not buying it physically and not buying it culturally.
Indeed. On that note, I also wanted to ask you about another sort of contradiction that I struggle to get my head around with regards to fashion. So obviously, fast fashion bad. We all know that. We all know that it basically the fast fashion that we consume, oftentimes actually through social media apps, because that's really easy to buy them, and we get all of our discount codes through those lovely influencers. Very polluting, really a bad wage situation. In 2022, an investigation by Channel 4 revealed that workers were paid just 0.03 pence per item and worked over 16 hours a day with no days off in some of these fast fashion brand factories. But I suppose what I'm also worrying about is not so much the people who could afford to choose between, those fast fashion brands that are often cheaper and a luxury brand if they wanted to. But is there not something in this which is also that there's been a huge impoverishment of the middle class and the working class in the global north as well, to the extent where today actually many people are semi-reliant on those brands to be able to actually buy clothes? Because it's not like I don't think that it's necessarily always because people love those items. It's because of affordability increasingly. And so in that situation, is it not that there is actually a direct conflict between, say, the liberation of the Bengali garment worker and, the factory worker here in the UK who still wants to be able to, buy new clothes and dress their children? Is there not a tension in both of their perception of what liberation looks like?
I think what's bad is this idea that you can buy your way into sustainability, right? That I've written a lot about that. You cannot buy your way into a climate positive world. Ultimately, it's a cultural issue. And to shame one group of people and to say it's the lower class who is addicted to fast fashion is the same narrative as saying it's the overpopulation of the global south that is contributing to climate change. None of these rhetorics are true. None of these rhetorics are true. Ultimately, there's a lot of elitism in sustainable circles. And this elitism is leading us to sort of conclusions that luxury is ultimately sustainable.
Apparently, recently I read it's not.
No, it isn't. That's the thing.
Say what? I always thought saving the planet through my YSL.
No,
apparently not.
We're actually, as my kids would say, no, in fact, it's not. And these rhetorics are, easily popularized and sellable to the masses. And there's a finger pointing left and right. Again, we're going back to the policing of, it's these groups of people. There were a lot of sustainable fashion girlies, eco-influencers that would stand in front of a fast fashion store and publicly shame people walking out of that store. And I thought, this was just vulgar. Like, it's just a vulgar tactique, because at the end of the day, you could do that same action, but go up the chain and go directly to the CEOs and to the CMOs and the people who are managing billions of dollars of profit that isn't redirected into a sustainable model, that is just kept in their pockets and put towards ads and put towards influencers that are selling more of this idea of comfort, this idea of even sustainability, because we're seeing now fast fashion groups are co-opting and adopting sustainability jargon and language, talking about organic cotton, recycled polyester. I mean, all of these things since 2013, I think, 2014, 2016. It's around 2019 that sustainable fashion entered the mainstream as a compound of words. And I think we had a lot to do with that, because we pushed for that in a way that was anti-elitist, that was more approachable, more accessible. That's why we chose to work with fast fashion groups, because if we can make a change at that scale, we can make a massive change. Now, of course, we're not doing that anymore. We don't have access to that, because ultimately, and we already knew that, but we were willing to do a leap of faith, is that fast fashion is deeply, deeply in bed with genocide. Fast fashion groups are leaning towards genocide today. Just like McDonald's, just like Starbucks, many of them are silencing, firing, and oppressing their own employees when they are talking about Palestine. Imagine their partners. So we are dealing with something that is cultural. It's a cultural awakening. It's a cultural demand. Culturally, folks that are at the mostly disadvantaged, people who are living in under the poverty line, are more sustainable because they are culturally reusing things. I mean, I come from a culture where ice cream plastic bin was reused into many different things. We keep things, we reuse them, we wash them, we take care of them. These are cultural ways of being sustainable. Sustainability is not something you buy, and it's certainly not something you toss in a donation bin, hoping that it's going to be donated to the poor. That is not sustainable.
I mean, we used to have our equivalent here in the UK, which was as a classic tin of biscuits. It could either have contained biscuits or your mom's sewing kit.
Exactly.
You never really knew. You'd have to go fishing and find out. I want to, I know we need to come to a close on this conversation, but I wanted to ask you about anti-intellectualism and rising authoritarianism. Earlier this year, the US government almost dissolved its Department of Education. Trump was boasting about how he won the hearts of every category. I quote, he said, "We won with young people, we won with old people, we won with highly educated people, we won with poorly educated people." I love the poorly educated. You don't say, Donny boy. In the past year before Trump, we've seen increasing attempts to ban books across the country and attacks on critical race theory. Is there a connection that you observe between rising authoritarianism and the attacks that we're seeing on education?
I mean, always. It has always been intertwined. Access to information has led to uprising and revolutions throughout history. And the connection between access to information, access to knowledge, access to education, leading to people uprising and demanding their rights is just one and the same. It's the two sides of the same coin. So to repress access to information, removing information from the governmental website, attacking educational bodies, attacking intellectuals, enforcing McCarthyism, censoring, working directly with big tech to censor, delete, and erase accounts of Palestinian photographers and journalists, not only digitally, but also on their physical bodies. Over 300 journalists have been killed in Palestine, in Gaza, murdered, specifically targeted by the Israeli occupation. All of these things are so that the public remains ignorant. But the public is far beyond the threshold of ignorance. No matter how they try to suppress, the domino effect is already, there's momentum. The domino is on. It's like ping.
The cat is out of the bag.
It's already in a huge momentum that is extremely difficult to control. So right now what we are looking at is their desperate attempts their delusional attempts. I mean, Trump is the archetype of manifest destiny delusion, where they will try to continue suppressing, targeting, hitting, silencing, arresting journalists, trying to shut down organizations like Slow Factory by defunding and terrorizing us. But we will not be the catalyst of this, of silence. We will not be able to. They will not be able to silence the revolution. The revolution is a buzzing sound that is palpable. And for the longest time, the common enemy was the Arab terrorist. The longest time to fear the Arab terrorist, to fear the savage. But right now, the savage has become their best friend, has become the public's journalist, the public's eyes, the public's heart. So how do you work with that? How do you work with this type of awakening? That's what's interesting. And that's where I find hope, ultimately. I'm not scared of their tactiques in erasing and silencing, because ultimately what we're doing is priceless. It's literally priceless. You can't buy what we're doing. You can't buy this type of trust that we have with the public, and you can't buy this type of momentum that we're experiencing collectively with other platforms in working in synchronicity. And ultimately, what's interesting to see is how their communication strategists and their dollars are going to be put towards things that we no longer care about. They're going to be putting money into putting people that nobody cares about on the cover of magazines. They're going to work on Hollywood and making glossy films that cost millions of dollars to try to sell us an idea of fear, success, and freedom for certain people. It's an interesting cultural moment right now.
It's I also, as you were talking, was thinking about what an awakening it's been for a lot of people who were probably within an uncritical sort of white supremacist mindset, which is the dominant mindset. So it's no shade on individual people. That's what we exist in this culture, who suddenly started to identify with people in Gaza. And so these Arabs that they'd long been told were dangerous and barbaric and the enemy, if you shatter that illusion, there's like a cascade effect, right? It's like, if I was lied to about that, what else have I also been lied to about? And it feels to me like that's like a defining aspect of this moment. It's like all of the reference points. Hold on, we can't trust the government. Hold on, when we march, they don't listen. Hold on, international law can't stop a genocide. Those people you said were baddies actually might be the goodies. You know, it's such a sort of overturning of the old order that I do think it portends, there's portent for something really significant. And so in many ways, restrictions on education feel to me like part of this wider moment of intellectually impoverishing the population so that we don't have the tools necessary to combat what's ahead. And so one of the things I was going to ask you about was this recent MIT study that found that relying on ChatGPT to write essays actually shrinks your brain. This is literally what college students around the world are now doing. Students using AI scored worse on brain scans and language tests. And I'm not surprised that, AI is turning us into passive zombies. Who knows whether that's the original objective. But, are we looking at a new kind of mind colonization? Do you see AI as a space that we should be looking at through the lens of, decoloniality?
We didn't need to wait for AI for that. It's been happening since forever. I mean, I talk about it in my book about internalized colonialism and the ways in which education has been used to condition us into thinking and trusting and obeying. I mean, ultimately, the educational model has not changed since the early 1800s, right? It has been created to prepare us to become good soldiers. And ultimately, since then, nothing has changed. Whether we add the component of AI on it or not, it has been created to dumb us down and to create us in a way where we are looking at life through silos and unable to create connection or partnerships or solidarity with our neighbors. I mean, look at gentrified neighborhoods. People walk in and out of their buildings. They don't even say hello to their neighbors. They have no idea who their name is, what their numbers are. If there is a climate catastrophe, how are they going to mobilize together? Ultimately, what we are being asked right now is to unlearn, right? sort of the harmful ways in which we've been conditioned. And you're mentioning it. People are saying, oh my God, if I can't trust the government, does that mean I can't trust this? And there is a general awakening, as I mentioned. That being said, the act of unlearning requires for us to take it upon ourselves and upon our communities to build resilient educational systems that allow us to share knowledge with one another. Maybe it is access to open education, or maybe it is holding salons and knowing who your neighbors are. And so ultimately, the call of our next generation is to be able to build these models that are replicable, teachable, lo-fi, and decentralized, so that we can multiply them and create a resilient system. Just like when you look at mycelium in the forest, everything is connected underneath the surface. When a tree is sick, other trees help the tree through their roots. That's a little bit what we have to look at as an example. We have to understand we're nature, and we have to learn from nature. There's tons of nature-based solutions that are taught in ways that are accessible through different types of modalities. And that is ultimately what we have to look into. How do we create these systems of resilience and these systems of solidarity that don't rely on hierarchy, but that are distributed? And that's what I'm interested in.
Final question. Do those systems have to be a vibe, Céline? I ask this because, brands, creators are having to experiment with tone, humor, authenticity, building a vibe with their community. How do you see the line between activism and entertainment evolving? Is there a risk that important causes can just become, another trend in the endless scroll? Or do we also have to reckon with, as we do too on this show, with the idea that people do also want to be entertained?
Ultimately, what this question is, the underlying of the question is that we are craving connection. We are craving connection with people. Teachers are funny. Teachers are entertaining.
My son would disagree, but sure.
Yes. Okay, agreed. Also, my kids would disagree, but a good teacher. A good teacher is funny. A good teacher is someone you look up to. I know there are good teachers out there. I've had the opportunity to have good and bad teachers, and I can recognize the difference.
Of course.
When I have a good teacher, it has, they become sort of your influencer, right? Mm-hmm. That's, for me, a good teacher is someone who can, bring the best out of you.
Of course.
And want you to, it gives you this energy to want to be doing better with your life and with the world. And I think that ultimately I thrive to be a good teacher. And if that means I need to be on camera and make a joke, honestly, I can crack a joke.
You sure can.
But does that count as entertainment, or what is the new genre, edutainment? I don't know. But Carl Sagan was an entertainer, and he was an educator, and he was extremely influential to me in how I related to science, because at school I sucked at science. I was very bad. I was bad at math. I didn't compute with the colonial system. I couldn't understand. But when I heard Carl Sagan and followed these types of shows, then I started to learn, and right now kids are learning on TikTok. They're learning all sorts of really cool things that their teachers can never teach them. And they're learning about, geopolitics on TikTok, and they're learning also about how to make an experiment or feed their plants or make sure that, all sorts of things are being taught in a way that is entertaining. Does not mean it's bad, does not mean it's disregarded. We need to really reckon with our relationship with elitism and what we considered good, what we considered status. To me, I always question that. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, I like to turn things on their heads a little bit. And at heart, I think that, I don't like to engage with elitism. Mm. Yes, I am an intellectual. I am a public intellectual. But the moment that people come and this is too complicated to understand, this is a learning lesson for me. Oh, I need to make it more accessible. It does not mean I'm dumbing it down, because that is looking down upon the public. No, I want to make it more accessible. So as you're reading this on your way to work, there's a light bulb, and I need to be humbled in that way. I don't want to be an elite.
Yeah, talking down. Céline, final question. We in the UK have just seen the banning of Palestine Action, which is a direct action group which has been undertaking, I guess, attacks on Elbit system factories, which are the factories that produce military equipment that is alleged to be used in the ongoing genocide in Gaza. How should people respond to this prescription at a time where, for many people, direct action was seen as one of the last forms of protest that might actually have an impact, because people have been marching, you know, they've been writing to their MPs, they've been doing all the sort of institutional, formal, polite forms of protest. Today, that type of direct action is criminalized, not just, you know, according to the regular laws that we have in this country, but under terrorism laws. You know, expressing support for Palestine Action today can come with up to 14 years potential sentence. That's longer than rapists typically spend in jail. So how should people respond to this moment, Céline?
I mean, that's just a testament that Palestine Action has been very effective. They wouldn't have had that type of crackdown if they were not being as effective as they are. And yes, vandalizing is effective, and it is criminalized because it is seen as bad, because ultimately what it does, it breaks status quo. Ultimately, anyone who is going to be shaking status quo is going to be called a terrorist, because you're terrorizing the rich boys. You know what I'm saying? It's like, if the rich boys are scared, then you're a terrorist, while the rich boys are the ones who are being the terrorists. Who is the terrorist in the situation? Police state, the militarized state, apartheid state. All of these bodies are terrorist bodies. We all know this. Like, this is not something that we can argue with. These are the terrorizing bodies, and the terrorizing bodies not only of Palestinians in Palestine, but now, as we are seeing, what's going on in Palestine is coming to you, and it's coming to your front door. So this is what we're witnessing. We're witnessing the rapid escalation of apartheid. And we're recognizing that we are not living in a democracy. We are living under apartheid. It's just soft drink apartheid. It's apartheid diet. But apartheid diet is ultimately apartheid. And you will see what's going to happen if we don't uprise and if we don't build solidarity. Individually, we will be squished like ants, and we have to work together. We have to build this general awareness about collective liberation, that it's not about dogma or organized religion or skin color or identity politics, as you mentioned. It's really about unifying our struggles, understanding that all of our struggles are intertwined. Feminism, trans liberation, bodily autonomy, incarceration, and abolitionism, all of these are intertwined with the climate movement. They're intertwined with the freedom of expression. They're intertwined with immigration and the rights of immigration. They're intertwined with apartheid and free Palestine and free Kashmir and free Tibet, and, you know, all of these nations that are under occupation, free West Sahara, and all of these occupations that are existing in continuity. If we want to break occupation, we must break free from our colonized mindset. And the fact of the matter is that it will take a lot of us to uprise, and it will take us to learn solidarity, relearn how to really be together, not conditionally and as a transaction, not through policing and lack of grace, but truly as human beings. It is a spiritual awakening.
Céline, thank you so much for sharing your
so
thoughts
much
with us today. Thank you for joining us on The Tea. Your being with us means the world to us. If you thought today's conversation was useful, subscribe now and join us on Patreon. Your support keeps this independent platform alive and these vital discussions flowing. Until next time, stay critical, stay connected, and keep pushing for a kinder world for all. Thanks for watching The Tea. Please remember to like and subscribe. And if you've made it this far, why not keep going and check out this episode?